On one level, John, this is a baffling fallout between central government and one bit of local government. Andy Burnham and the other council leaders in the Greater Manchester area were asking for 65 million by the end of these negotiations. The government was offering 60. There are people in the Treasury who don't bend down and pick 5 million off the carpet if they see it there. It is a minor amount, but the government felt this was a very public battle of wills that they had to win. And I think that tells you something about how many demands they think could be made on the Treasury as the COVID struggle carries on for quite a few months at least to come. But winning a public battle like this comes at a bit of a cost. There's real disgruntlement amongst some Tory MPs, one of them on a Zoom call with the Health Secretary earlier saying the government was an embarrassment. And there's a danger on compliance. It might weaken compliance in the Greater Manchester area that this policy, as it were, has been born in this way. And the government could end up paying out the 60 million anyway. There was this defiance today where they said you might not get any of it, and we might want to start from scratch negotiating with all the composite councils of Greater Manchester. But those councils have worked together for a very long time, and although that threat was made today, it may not be delivered on.
Across Manchester. It's 12 o'clock and time is now up.
The deadline's just passed.
The deadline passed. The talks stalled between Greater Manchester and the government. The Prime Minister and Greater Manchester Mayor Andy Burnham was still on the phone at midday. The haggling narrowed to a difference of £5 million of government funding. But the government wouldn't budge, and 2 hours later, the government called time.
Greater Manchester's set to have a Tier 3 local lockdown imposed without the approval of local leaders.
I can announce that Greater Manchester will move to the very high alert level. That means that pubs and bars must close unless they're serving substantial meals. Households can't mix indoors or in most outdoor settings.
So I'm really grateful to them all for joining me this afternoon.
Andy Burnham, surrounded by other local government chiefs, said this episode proved the government's whole approach would fail.
I don't believe we can proceed as a country on this basis through the pandemic by grinding communities down through punishing financial negotiations. We are asking a lot of the public at this difficult time, and we need to carry them with us, not crush their spirit. We need national unity, and that is why I now look to Parliament to intervene.
Whilst it's only, I think, 27 members of Parliament of two parties who represent Greater Manchester seats, I think a lot of members of Parliament, having seen what is being imposed on Greater Manchester, might also just reflect on the dangers for their own area in the future.
Greater Manchester will be joining the Liverpool region and Lancashire in Tier 3. The government's allowed the rules to vary slightly between these regions, as well as pubs and bookies closing. Soft play centres close in Greater Manchester, as in Lancashire, but not in Liverpool. On top of the money the government's giving to each region for test and trace and enforcement, 14 million for Liverpool, 12 million for Lancashire, 22 million for Greater Manchester. The government's giving money for business support. 30 million to Liverpool, 30 million to Lancashire. While Andy Burnham was holding his press conference, he heard the 60 million offer to his region was now off the table. The government may now try to negotiate with individual local authorities from scratch.
This is what's been said to MPs. It's going to be £20 million only, and they are going to try and pick off individual councils.
That's the basic money for test and trace and enforcement. No extra help for business.
I mean, it's brutal, to be honest, isn't it? This is no way to run the country in a national crisis. It isn't.
What we couldn't do, I hope people understand, was do a deal with Greater Manchester that really would have been out of kilter with the agreements we'd already reached with Merseyside and with Lancashire. That was the problem.
The government's hoping the relatively smooth talks on help for Tier 3 with Liverpool and Lancashire, compared with the collapsed talks with Greater Manchester, will be a warning to those areas now under close watch for Tier 3 status. Don't push the government too much. South Yorkshire, West Yorkshire and Nottinghamshire are in their immediate sights. The North East is hoping its improved numbers may buy it more time.
I think there's a real worry that what we're looking at here is an attempt to move to if not a national lockdown, then a very significant number of people in regional lockdowns for a very long period of time.
Manchester's local government leaders said citizens should obey the laws, but all recognise a public tussle in which the home team loses is not the ideal way to launch a tough public health initiative.
Well, while we've been on air, the Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, has been giving a statement to MPs.
So we must act where the virus is spreading. In the parts of the country where it's spreading the fastest, it is our sombre duty to take action necessary to protect people's lives and protect the NHS. Mr. Speaker, coronavirus is not a short-term problem that can easily be fixed. It requires difficult decisions in these difficult times.
Well, how is the news being received in Greater Manchester as local MPs accuse the government of waging war on people in the area, describing its actions as immoral? Our North of England correspondent Claire Fallon is in Manchester. Claire.
Well, in these times, I know the word extraordinary is frankly overused, but what happened here today, I have never seen anything like it, because during that press conference, midway through, I saw Sir Richard Lees, the leader of Manchester City Council, reading a message on his phone. He showed it to the other officials around him, and I clocked the looks on their faces, just a look of complete astonishment. And that message was the details of the finances that Andy Burnham says will leave Greater Manchester facing a winter of hardship. And we know that already there are many people feeling that hardship. But as we found today, also huge feelings here of anger and frustration.
Andy Burnham.
Would this be the day the dancing would be to a different beat?
Andy Burnham.
Would a mayor seen by some as King of the North stand firm? Would agreement be reached? Or would rules and restrictions be imposed by London? As the government's deadline came and went, in St Peter's Square, they waited. No one sure exactly what for, but with a feeling of inevitability. Go on, what do you reckon?
Well.
And also, from some, anger.
The people, the working class, are going to suffer, that's what I reckon. Yeah, just like there. What happened there, Peterloo Massacre?
We have been under restriction for 3 months and it's not worked. What is the point of doing the same thing again? We need testing, we need tracking, we need all those things that other people have done elsewhere successfully to control the infection. The government has let us down.
For almost 3 million people in Greater Manchester, this is not about a political standoff or a polarised trade-off between lives and livelihoods.
If you don't take into account those economic conditions when you look at putting further lockdowns on a particular area, your public health response will not be as effective as it could be. And I think terms like standoff, which is how it is being portrayed, I don't think is fair. I think what both central government and local government want is the most effective measures to prevent loss of life from COVID, be that direct, indirect, or by the NHS being overwhelmed. And, you know, there are no easy answers here.
Among the businesses forced to close later this week will be pubs, at least those that don't serve food. At the Britain's Protection, we found an empty bar. To protect themselves from closure, food may be back on the menu soon.
We're whiskey, we're beer, we're cask. You know, it's been that kind of place where people come in for a drink and a chat, and they get to relax with each other. You know, COVID itself has put restrictions in place which you have to follow, but I think you'll find there's a lot of pubs that won't reopen if we go into tier 3 or into a circuit break. I think you'll find a lot of places will end up being shut for good.
And all the livelihoods that go with them.
Exactly.
By late afternoon, as the cameras gathered and council leaders got ready to give their reaction, it became clear they didn't yet have all the details to react to. No, but when does tier 3 kick in?
Oh, I have no idea.
You don't know?
No, we don't know.
You don't know when pubs are going to have to close?
No. It is both nuts and bizarre.
We now know Friday will be the day Other things are still unclear, like how, after everything, to get people on side. You will have heard, as I have, in recent months, people using the Dominic Cummings excuse when they've not stuck to the rules. Are you now worried that you will become an excuse for not sticking to the rules, having spent the last week and a bit telling people that they're not fair and that they won't work?
Oh, I am making a direct appeal to you all, please, to follow the public health guidance, to look out for each other, because we're going to have to work harder now to get through this together.
But with different rules in different areas and different finances for some, there will be many who feel we are no longer all in this together. Well, after several days of uncertainty this evening, frankly, we have yet more uncertainty. But I have been given an interesting insight this evening into the way these negotiations played out in Lancashire over going into Tier 3, where they accepted what was offered by the government. And it all sounds very, very similar, because I'm told that the councils started out asking for more. In the end, there was just a £5 million gap between where the councils dropped down to and the government would go up to. And as it was put to me by one person who's across the details of these negotiations, they were faced with a choice: either accept £42 million or be left with £12 million. And they decided not to call the government's bluff on that. And I think also with this, it clearly sends out a message to other areas that will be entering into these conversations in the coming days and weeks about how the government will deal with this.
Claire, thanks very much for joining us. Well, no one from the UK government would come on the programme tonight. We also asked a dozen Conservative MPs who also did not wish to appear. But joining us now from her Oldham constituency is the Labour MP, Debbie Abrahams. Debbie Abrahams, Andy Burnham accused the government of playing poker with people's lives. Couldn't the very same accusation be levelled at local leaders in Manchester, given the number of deaths today?
No, I don't think that's fair, Kathy. What Andy and the other Oldham, Greater Manchester leaders were trying to do was to get the best deal for their constituents, and they've been following the evidence. They know that more action is needed, but they also know that poverty, that making sure that you have enough money to be able to pay your rent or your mortgage, are also important to ensure that we keep people's health and their life and livelihoods on track. It's so important that we make sure that we have that additional financial support. So I'm deeply, deeply disappointed with the government. The government have really showed a contempt for my constituents and the people of Greater Manchester.
Well, we were hearing exactly the same message from Merseyside and Lancashire, but just set out for us, if you can, why Manchester should get more than Merseyside or Lancashire. They ended up signing on the dotted line for less than they wanted.
I think it was, as I understand it, in terms of how the financial package was put together, and this was fully costed. It was looking at how can we make sure that people have at least 80% of the income that they have, whether that's people who are employed, whether that's the self-employed who get no support through universal credit. The government have been really disingenuous about this. Freelancers similarly. So what was the top up that was needed? So it was looking at our workforce, but it was also looking at our business density. And of course, that will vary from region to region. To suggest that you can have a one size fits all is just completely wrong.
Was Andy Burnham too proud to do a deal, as Number 10 is briefing?
I've known Andy a really long time. Before I became an MP, he's one of the most honourable people that I've come across. And to suggest that he wanted anything but the best for the people of Greater Manchester is again really, really unfair. So as I get back to my points, sorry.
If infections do go up in your area, if deaths go up, will Number 10 get the blame, or will Andy Burnham get the blame? Is he seen as a local hero, or is there some concern?
I would put it fairly and squarely with the government. The government have the purse strings. The government have opportunity here to put it right, and I would urge them to. Let's be grown-ups now, for heaven's sake. These are people's lives at stake. Do the right thing. This is not, not a large amount of money. We must approach this as we would a war. We are at war with this pandemic, and it needs the same type of action, Kathy. It is completely irresponsible to just disregard the people of Greater Manchester in the way that they have been. And I urge the Secretary of State, and I will be when I speak with him in a moment and in the health statement, to do the right thing, to liaise with the Treasury, which I think is the stumbling block. Trying to do pandemic management on the cheap is just completely wrong.
Well, the Tier 3 restrictions will now be imposed in Manchester regardless. Given that Mayor Andy Burnham has launched this revolt, won't people on the ground rebel against these restrictions and refuse to follow them?
Well, as you heard in that package before, Kathy, Andy has urged everybody to do the right thing. First of all, to look after each other and to look out for each other. We only get through this if we all work together and pull in the same direction, and to observe the guidelines, to make sure that they're social distancing, making sure that they've got face masks in public areas and so on. To self-isolate if they do test positive, always to do the right thing. But again, the evidence shows that the only way that local restrictions work, Kathy, is when you have a full, fair financial package. And this is looking at places like Auckland and Victoria, who successfully come out of surges like we've seen there.
Debbie Abrahams, thanks very much for joining us.